Hey, welcome. Part 4, Franklin Lynch story. And this is where it's hard, man. It's hard. You know, once again, this is probably therapy for me because I'm able to share my feelings and be real about someone that, you know, that inspired me. You know, and I didn't. You know, when you're young, you don't realize it. I realized it then, but now it's just so many different things in that short time that I knew him that I learned as far as entertaining and music and shit. So I'm gonna read a little bit. You know, some of it I'm gonna get from the article. We'll be putting up some pictures from the archives. And we're gonna go from there. So it was March 7th, and we were in New York, and I remember mother getting a call. Like, what? You know, and the only time I remember her doing that was some years earlier to that when my uncle passed away. So it was, you know, I'm like, whoa, I just hear stuff. And then we hear that, now, Joe, Franklin Lynch, cousin Joe, lived with my grandparents. And then my great-grandmother lived up the block. Like, so they stayed on Humboldt Ave and Monroe Street was right there. So it was about 4 minutes, 5 minutes, not even, you can get there. So, he did a show. Now I'm gonna read this part. The song was out. It didn't do as well as it should have, but they were still. And I remember. Let me jump to this part. When the song came out, the actual physical copy of the song, and we went and he gave us some. He was upset. He was upset. It was a couple of things. One of the main things he was upset was the name. He, you know, like I said in episode 1, that nobody called him Frank at all. It was Franklin Lynch, or Joe, actually. Nobody even called him Frank, you know. So he was very, 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 he was not happy. And not to slight anybody, but it was some other other stuff about his name. It was some other, and as I'm older, in the music, it was basically the tone of my credit, my da-da-da-da. You know, it was a vibe, it was an energy that he wasn't happy. And I remember one of my older cousins, they were the same age. They actually lived together at one point. They, you know, well, I told you don't mess, you know, with these particular people, because it was rumblings that, it's the industry. It's, you know, how stuff goes on. So, you know, he wasn't happy, not about the quality, not about that. It was just the labeling. It was something with the labeling that he felt, nah. So, you know, that's a mystery. That's, I wish I knew exactly, but it was really something. I know one of them was the name for sure. So they had actually did a show, I believe it was on a Friday night. A young girl was rumbling and was getting ready to do better and better. Let me put this a little that way. So on Friday night they were playing him and Herschel were playing at this famous Boston club called Paul's Mall. At the time, he was living, like I said, living with my grandparents, which is his aunt. They said after, he was actually living with Herschel as well, but he said after the show, Herschel was driving Frank home and said Frank began to act funny and kept talking about death and how he knew he was going to die that night. Lynch got into an argument with his aunt, which escalated into a physical fight. A neighbor called the police and Okay. So my mother gets the call and, she said, oh, well, so what we hear is he got into an argument with my grandfather, my grandmother, and he pushed now, and they lived in Boston. It was these sliding glass doors that led to the backyard that he pushed my grandfather through the backyard, right? So, I don't know what was going on. I don't know. So then they say that after that, he runs to my great-grandmother's house, which and while's out there, just does things. The neighbors call the cops. Cops come, somehow he dislocates his shoulder. So they take him to the hospital. Boom. Now, we get the call again that he's at the hospital at this point. Boom. So, okay. So the rumblings still is going to get. So now we're going to jump to the Boston Magazine article that Carly did. Okay. So give me 1 second. All right, so boom. When he arrived, cops come, they take him to Boston City Hospital on the morning of March 7th, 1970. They said he seemed lost. He had busted his shoulder, was dislocated. The nurses thought, busted his shoulder, separated, the nurses thought. And yet he refused to let them near it. Even as his behavior grew increasingly erratic, when he was officially admitted and traded his street clothes for hospital Johnny, a nurse asked him why he wore a watch with nothing inside the glass. Lynch told her he had special ability to tell time from an invisible clock. Once settled, he refused painkillers. He asked for Bengay and ice cream. One nurse described him wandering around the hospital interviewing patients, pulling tools off surgical carts and spitting in wastebaskets. Finally, in the early afternoon, he allowed doctors to perform surgery on his shoulders. Now, I remember us getting this call saying that he was going through surgery. And when he awoke from general anesthesia, he found his arm set in a heavy cast, twisted uncomfortably in a sling behind his back. So they got you like this. This is a cast, okay? They got your arm behind, boom. So this is how he was. That's important. So shortly after he was received, a nurse found him in the bathroom using his one good arm to run a shoe under a water faucet, water spilling onto the floor. When she asked what he was doing, he told her he was washing his shoes. Now, stop right there. When we try to figure out what actually started the argument of between him and my grandparents. It was something about him. He was burning matches. He was doing something, doing something. They got into it. Now, there was also rumblings and, like I said, I'm a kid. So once he died, once we were there, once the funeral and all of that, and all of these people coming around, you had, the rumblings, so I would listen, I would hear. And one of the things, it was like somebody put something in his drink, at the club that night. And that sent him, whether it was LSD, whether it was what. Then it was rumblings that the arch enemy, the same person who was his competition, whatever, did something to him. So all kind of little rumblings that, it didn't make sense, to perform, sing, do good, get off stage, have a drink or whatever you did, you and Herschel ride home and you start talking, wild stuff. You know what I mean? So that theory, that alone, I just felt, and he could have took it himself, but it was always somebody was there, somebody put something in his drink, and that's what happened. So it's crazy.